Every once in a while, I cover a story about a celebrity or an athlete who personally I can't stand, who I don't think has any level of talent that is remarkable, so why they're famous in the first place also goes into my negative coverage of those people. However, this is not the case with the subject of today's story. Peter Dinklage is actually wonderfully talented. Peter Dinklage obviously is well known for bringing Tyrion Lannister to life, a character who through the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones was absolutely amazing, interesting, and compelling, and then through the last 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, through no fault of his own, due to the fact that the writing totally fell apart on him, was not compelling or interesting or anything like that. But Peter Dinklage, still a good actor. Peter Dinklage, still wonderful, and Peter Dinklage made himself the preeminent little person, in terms of acting roles going forward for years. Now, considering Peter is incredibly talented, considering Peter is incredibly blessed to have had the success that he's had, it was really unfortunate for him to basically participate in cancel culture and end up having the effect of destroying 7 roles for little people or for dwarves, whatever the correct term is, I'm not exactly sure, because he didn't like the fact that the title of Snow White is Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. We're going to talk about this, we're going to go over it, we're going to react to what Peter Dinklage said, we're going to acknowledge his feelings because I'm a good person, but first, we got an ad read, let's do the ad read, and I'll catch you on the other side. Look, I hate to get personal with you, but your sheets are gross. There's an odor, they're a magnet for bacteria, you're sweating in them all the time, but guess what? It's not 100% your fault. Now, humans are gross in general, but it's still not 100% your personal fault. But this is where mymiraclesheets.com comes in, because you see, these wonderful sheets that they were gracious enough to send me a sample of actually have an antimicrobial silver interwoven into the fabric, and me, being the guy that I am, think silver sheets, those must be rock hard. No, they're definitely not. They're actually very soft to the touch, and probably the best sheets I've ever used in my entire life. Also, it improves all the problems I was talking about, odor, backne, all those issues, mymiraclesheets.com antimicrobial system deals with in a great way.
There's a lot of hypocrisy going on, I gotta say, from being somebody who's a little bit unique, front row seat to some...
Really? Like what? Like what do you see?
Well, it's really progressive to cast literally no offense to anything, but I was a little taken back by they're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White.
Yeah.
So either at the beginning of this month or last month, Peter Dinklage made an appearance on the Mark Maron podcast. And I'm not exactly sure what the context was, but Peter Dinklage gives a setup to what he's about to talk about with hypocrisy. He's talking about how there's hypocrisy potentially in these woke movements or whatever. And Mark Maron eventually pushes him to give more information on what he's talking about, for him to give a specific example. So Peter Dinklage goes to Snow White, and specifically their decision to cast a Latina actress in the role of Snow White. By the way, needs to be pointed out, needs to be said, it always needs to be said, and always needs to be pointed out, that all of these live-action Disney reboots are terrible, they're unnecessary, stop remaking your animated movies, nobody wants to watch them, also they're fairy tales, so you can make versions that are in live action that are not direct copies of your animated works, except far worse with extra nonsense like political correctness in it. So that needs to be said. I need to put that out there. I need to let that be known to the world, because you out there in the world need to know that all these live action Disney movies are not good, and under normal circumstances, them not being made is good for society. Stop giving Disney your money. If you want to watch better versions of Aladdin, don't watch the Will Smith Genie one. Go watch the original animated movie. You don't need things to be in live action for them to be watchable. Nothing's wrong with the animation. Secondly, I reject the notion, I'm against the notion, that recasting Snow White as a Latina woman, and by the way, the proper terminology for what we're talking about is Latin X, is actually a form of progress. I mean, the lady's name is Snow White, so what you're basically doing is taking a historically white supremacist character and putting a Latin face on it, which is honestly disrespectful to the Latins. And I'm half Hispanic, half Puerto Rican. So for me to say this, it comes from a place of authority, and none of you can disagree with me based on the fact that I have ethnic ties to both versions of the roles, and therefore I know all lived experience trumps everything, therefore you need to be quiet. But Peter Dinklage ends up having an issue with the fact that the story is called Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and he calls it backwards.
But you're still telling the story of Snow White,
Snow White, yeah.
and Seven Dwarves.
Sure.
So, look, take a step back and look at what you're doing there.
Yeah.
I know. That makes no sense to me.
Well, so what,
You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of seven dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
Now look, I understand that Peter Dinklage is himself a dwarf, or if the proper term is person of dwarfism or little person, whatever you want to call them right now, that's what Peter Dinklage is, so he might feel extra sensitive about stories involving dwarves. However, the story involves seven dwarves. Like, that's it. It's not that they're portrayed as monsters or bad people or anything like that. It's Snow White and she's with seven dwarves. It's a story about them. And if you're a dwarf actor and you want to be connected to Disney, and by the way, Disney happens to promote from within, look at how many people appear in Star Wars and Marvel or in like the Disney Channel originals and then end up growing up to appear in Marvel movies. These are great opportunities for actors to be tied in with this multi-billion-dollar media company that could find roles for them in the future. So let's be clear about this. Peter Dinklage has not made a successful case for the seven dwarves even being offensive so far, but what he's doing has the effect, and by the way, since they announced that they're probably canceling this movie, did have the effect of pulling away 7 good roles from dwarf actors, all based on the fact that Peter Dinklage is uncomfortable about the title.
Backward story of seven dwarves living in a cave. What the
Now look, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I haven't read every iteration of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. I haven't even watched the Disney movie in any recent memory, so I'm not sure if I'm totally out of line when I say this, but I don't remember the seven dwarves being dwarves that live in a cave. Also, living in a cave, especially when you're talking about a story that takes place in the past, is not necessarily a bad thing. It's really weird that Peter Dinklage would be angry about this. Now, maybe you guys know the particulars of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves a little bit better than me. Maybe Peter Dinklage knows the particulars a little bit better than me. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. So let me know in the comments below. But also, does it really matter if at some point the dwarves lived in a cave in the story? These are really old stories that take place in the past, and humans tended to live in caves at different points in the history. It's actually quite a nice shelter. It's actually something that helped us evolve and get advantages on tigers and lions and all that. And yes, I just fumbled through the word advantages.
what are you doing, man? Have I done nothing to advance the cause from my soapbox?
Now, I do want to say, and maybe this gets left out of the context, especially when this story gets written up by news articles, but Peter Dinklage is being a little bit lighthearted in the way that he's talking about this. However, the core of his message is actually serious. It is actually legitimate, and he says it, and you can hear it in the change.
I guess I'm not loud enough. I don't know what studio that is, but they were so proud of that, and all love and respect to the actress and to the people who thought they were doing the right thing. But I'm just like, what are you doing?
In his tone of voice during the course of this interview when you get to different points. So while he's joking about it, while he's laughing about it, there is a serious component of it, and that serious component is Peter Dinklage is offended by this movie. Now maybe, just maybe, and this is speculation, and by speculation I mean I'm literally making this up, at some point during Peter Dinklage's high school acting career, when he was trying out for the school play, he didn't get the part for one of the seven dwarves and was cast as either another one or not cast at all, and he's angry and bitter about this IP in particular. But overall, he seems unusually fixated on this because, again, I never read this as offensive. On top of that, I never read dwarves in fiction as identical to legitimate dwarves in reality. Gimli from Lord of the Rings was a dwarf, as in he was like the elves, as in he was a different species from humans, so I would always see dwarves in movies and shows, etc., especially when they're not live action and they're animated, as different species and not literal representations of actual dwarves that we see in real life. Maybe that's just me, maybe that's just crazy, I don't know. Again, I'm not the person that really is affected by this because A, I hate the live-action Disney movies in the first place, and B, I don't see why this is offensive unless there's some kind of personal thing or Peter Dinklage is just linking all dwarves in media to himself.
And all love and respect to the actress and to the people who thought they were doing the right thing, but I'm just like, what are you doing?
And again, just to hammer the point home that Peter Dinklage is serious, he closes it out, or at least the clip closes out, with him saying, well, you're trying to be progressive in another way, more or less, but what are you doing? Why are you doing this? He really is against this move.
By the way, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm going to be super authentic and vulnerable here. I don't know if it's even okay to say dwarf. Like, is that okay? I don't know.
So,
I don't want this to come back to bite me in the ass like 10 years later.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So look, I had the same question, and the articles clearly refer to dwarves. Will they later change the rule? Very likely. Will they then have video compilations of us saying the word and hold us guilty in hindsight?
Yeah.
Of course they will. And so am I referring to the left? Yes, I am, okay? And so it's an insane standard, it makes no sense. But since right now, as things stand, everybody is using the word dwarf, I guess we will too. So you can hold us guilty later and invent a time machine so we can fix it as well.
Now look, Peter Dinklage, and deservedly so based on his talent and ability and the roles that he's gotten and how he's performed in a lot of those roles, is the most powerful dwarf in Hollywood. His voice has a lot of weight. So in response to this, Disney has kind of pulled back on this movie. But the thing is, there are other dwarf actors that are up and coming or want to be up and coming that saw these roles, this live action opportunity, as their dream job, as something that was going to propel their career forward. So they were none too pleased by Peter Dinklage basically shutting down the possibility for other people, even though he didn't have to play this role. And again, dwarves are seen as mythical creatures, and the dwarves in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs are not played as some kind of villains or some kind of monsters or anything like that. They're actually like quite helpful and supportive, and they kind of make the story work. You can't really do the story as good without them. So one of these actors actually appeared on Tucker Carlson, and he made his case that he had a dream of being in the WWE, and he was never going to be in the WWE based on his physical limitations, up until a point where they opened up a role for a dwarf, and he was able to realize his dream.
I mean, my biggest thing is he wants to be progressive, and it's all about progression, and I support that completely. But the issue is him being progressive is eliminating 7 potential dream jobs from the dwarf acting community, and that's my issue here. Is he's saying he wants to move forward and do good for the community when these are dream jobs. I got hired by WWE. WWE was my dream job since I was 4 years old. Since I was 4 years old, all I wanted to be was a WWE superstar. And in any other circumstance, it wouldn't have been able to be done by me. I'm not 6 foot, I'm not 250 pounds, but they were looking for a person like me, a little person, to fill this role. They hired me, and I got to live my dream for 10 years. Now, there's dwarf actors out there that their dream is to star in a film, especially a Disney film, because as we know, Disney doesn't do remakes or any of their movies at a small scale. They were going to blow this movie up, obviously. And these are 7 roles that are few and far between for dwarves anyways, that were made for us. And that's what's ridiculous to me about the whole situation is it's not being progressive. You're hurting the community by what you're doing.
Now, I don't know the particulars of his WWE role. I don't know when this WWE role was actually portrayed on screen, but I know the WWE has not been afraid to lean into stereotypes in ways that were uncomfortable before, so I'm sure there was some criticism of him taking this role at the time, but in reality, this was the role that he could get, and he was trying to use that to propel his career going forward, and he was incredibly happy to have the role. So even if you don't like something, even if you don't think it's respectable, even if you find something demeaning, it's not necessarily up to you as the most successful person in this category to cut down the ladder behind you and prevent any of the other people from being able to assume those roles and hopefully make careers based on that. That's the overall takeaway and the overall effect of what Peter Dinklage did. In an attempt to make a stand for his progressive values, he ended up creating a situation where dwarves have less opportunities in Hollywood, and this will have ripple effects for other roles where there are actual dwarves in them, for those people to not actually hire dwarves, because people like Peter Dinklage, the most powerful, prominent dwarf in Hollywood, might declare it offensive on a podcast when you're in the middle of development of the project. So basically, Peter Dinklage created a chilling effect for the very community that he's allegedly trying to protect the feelings of, all because he personally has issues with the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But hey, listen, those are just my thoughts. Maybe you disagree with me completely. Maybe you think Peter Dinklage is in the right. Honestly, you can make the case for that in the comments of this video. If you like it, you show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about Peter Dinklage canceling the 7 Dwarves. Till next time.